Beyond 3D.
Good Saturday evening, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Beyond 3D. Matt and Clint here, coming from Studio One at RWP 98.7. Hopefully everyone is having a great time out there and getting ready for the end of the world as we know it. How are you, Clint?
I don't even know what to say anymore. I really don't. What a time to be alive.
I'll tell you what, it's been fun.
What a time. In between Trump and Hillary, and I hate politics, I really do, and I don't even know how it crept into our show. I think politics got touched on because of disclosure.
It got touched on because of disclosure. It got touched on because of Bilderberg. It got touched on because we both know Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton went to a Bilderberg meeting in Virginia back in 2008 before Barack Obama was elected, and he was chosen to be president, and she was chosen to come after him. And it was touched on because you basically stated that Hillary Clinton was going to win no matter what. Because it was chosen.
Thanks for reminding me. Things are getting a little bit tight at the moment.
Oh, look, it's really a lot of fun. So what I would suggest to everybody in Australia, if you can, Wednesday, which will be Tuesday in the States, sit back, relax late in the evening, early in the morning actually, grab a bottle of wine and just watch the fireworks.
No. Do not use the word relax in that sentence because the world is going to change radically.
Oh, that's for sure.
You were mentioning earlier, Matt, the possibility of the National Guard being called in.
Oh, yes.
Now, can we elaborate on that just a little bit tonight?
Yes, there have been a lot of right-wing groups in the United States that have decreed if Donald Trump does not win, they're going to grab their muskets and it'll be on for young and old.
Their muskets or their...
their AR-47s and their 50 cals and everything else you could possibly
semi-automatic
imagine. A few Glocks, 9mm and... What is it, Magnums and 357 and 44 Magnums, etc., etc.
Just the usual stuff they keep under the bed.
Few Molotovs and all that kind of stuff, and they're just going to go to town.
Now, do you want to unravel that just a little bit more as to why?
Because they believe that the only way their candidate can lose is if the election was rigged, if he was cheated in some way.
Yeah, right.
And so therefore they have been...
I'm just laughing at it, like, oh look, we know what the situation is, but these people don't get it.
They don't get it. And this is the whole thing. I mean, I listened to an interview from Australia this morning, and they had one of... Believe it or not, and this was funny enough for me, one of Donald Trump's spiritual advisors.
Sorry, I just choked on my coffee.
Which, in my opinion, that's an oxymoron and a half. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And they're talking about, he's not as bad at this. And so it's actually, to me, quite frankly, it is absolutely hilarious and a lot of fun at this point in the election cycle to watch what happens and to watch all the pundits out there say what they have to say, do what they have to do. This has, and guys, we've talked about this enough, you know it, this has been the most negative energy election campaign that I have seen in my lifetime, I would say. And that's a long time.
Just, people come forward and they say things like, how is a person like Trump able to have a crack at the top job?
Because one thing you have to give him, he is a brilliant marketer.
He's a great marketer, but he has no substance. Everything he says, he comes forward on his podium speeches and he says, we're going to do wonderful things.
Okay. Because he's not going to do anything.
What are these wonderful things, Donald, that you're planning on doing?
He's not going to do anything.
I know this, but he's not going to do anything because he's not going to get in, and even Donald doesn't realise it.
Well, he'll realize it Wednesday morning, but the fact of the matter is it won't be over Wednesday morning in the United States.
But the thing is, with Hillary, she's just as bad.
Yes.
She's just as bad, but at least she has the savvy and the experience in the office to deal with international politics.
As they said, even when Ronald Reagan got in and they kept on saying he was an actor, and he got in, the fact of the matter was he had some political experience as governor of California before ascending to the presidency. Donald Trump has no political experience whatsoever. He has not been a dog catcher. He has not been a judge.
Are you sure? I've seen some of his
He has not done anything. He has not been in a school board. He has done absolutely, positively, unequivocally nothing around elections, politics, or anything like that. And just like Donald Trump and his narcissistic self, he wants to start at the top. he doesn't want to work his way through. He's got to start at the top.
I'm going to call this now. I guarantee you some newspaper in the world will run the headline, Trump, you're fired.
Oh, if he loses, I guarantee you're going to hear that in every daggone newspaper on the planet. And it'll be, but the fact of the matter is, what'll happen is, and this is a shame, but this is the way it's going to go, it's going to be like 2000. What's going to happen is, hey, they both have already put their lawyers in place, and they are both ready to contest the election no matter what. Now, latest polls as of this Saturday night, guys, and this is a poll that is not one of Trump's paid-for polls or Trump's paid-for polls that he didn't pay for.
Can we get back to that in a second?
Yeah.
Yeah, you keep talking about you keep going down the path you're going down. I want to come back to at the start of this in a sec, but keep going.
Okay, Trump has his own internal polls, but as it came out earlier in the week, he has not paid his internal pollster, and based upon that, he owes his pollster $750,000, so he's no longer getting any internal polls because maybe the pollster did his job and he just decided he didn't like the kind of numbers that the guy was coming out with. Who knows? But that's Donald Trump.
So back to the point that I wanted to bring up again.
Go for it. Yep.
I just happened to be watching, if you could call it television, this week.
Yes.
A light-hearted news program that's on during the weeknight.
Okay.
They were quoting the fact that Trump is leading in the polls, and this TV show, this lighthearted news TV show, was using a Fox poll and passing it off to the Australian public as rhetoric that Trump is leading in the polls. And I'm watching this thinking, man, you didn't research this yourself. All you're doing is reading from an auto cue that somebody has captured the information off Google, off a poll from Fox, who are in Trump's pocket. And it just blows my mind that that information goes out to the rest of the world and it's not even fact-checked.
No. I use a different poll. The poll I use is Investors Business Daily. The reason I like Investors Business Daily is because a very good school friend of mine is on the editorial board there. And I know their numbers are pretty good. And as far as they are concerned, this Saturday night, Hillary Clinton is up by 2.7.
And that's a lot.
Considering, but it is still within the margin of error, and so a lot can go on. But guys, it will be an absolute fun time in the United States coming up next week.
No, it won't.
Yeah, it will, because there's a lot of the right-wing wackos will be out there trying to do their thing and act like fools. And they've already started by burning down churches, black churches in Mississippi, and writing on the side of the building, "Vote Trump." They have, and this was the funniest thing I've ever heard. It was absolutely hilarious. The KKK decided they were going to go out into minority areas on voting day and offer people marijuana and malt liquor to try to get them to go home and not vote.
Malt liquor?
Malt liquor.
Now there's a stereotype.
Yeah, exactly. Colt 45 malt liquor. It is the most ridiculous thing you've ever heard. But this is the kind of stuff that people are coming up with. I mean, we have had, and this was really funny, a few televangelists out there, Jim Baker being one of them, has come out and stated that Donald Trump is divinely blessed by the Lord, and if he does not win, it means the end of the world.
Boy.
But here's the thing. Okay, so now Jim Baker has come out and he has basically stated, along with a few other televangelists, that Trump is divinely chosen. If he doesn't win, it's the end of the world as we know it. They are saying that they are correct because of all the earthquakes that are going on in Italy, including the ones that are knocking some of the ceiling paintings crazy in the basilicas. I find it absolutely hilarious, to be perfectly honest with you, but it's fun to watch. It's a lot of fun to watch.
I was contemplating the difference the other day between why it is that the US political system is in the state that it is in compared to our Australian political system. And the difference being, from what I can sort of ascertain, is both political systems originally came from the British rule.
Yes, they did.
And when America had its Declaration of Independence and broke away from the English, that created an opportunity for corruption to creep into the American political system because it was no longer governed by British rule. So once that happened, that's when you started seeing the rise of organisations like Skull and Bones creep in. The Freemasons.
Just about all the presidents were Freemasons.
Yep, the Freemasons. And the entire system then became nefarious. And decisions were made behind closed doors, and the people were given the opportunity to vote, not realising that their votes didn't actually mean anything because there was another more nefarious agenda in the background that was turning the wheels in the directions that it wanted to go. And that's the difference between, let's say, the American political system today and the Australian political system, whereas we're still governed by British rule, and we still have the greater perception that our society can make decisions based on our votes. So our votes count.
Mm-hmm.
And the illusion is the American political system, their votes count, but they don't really count. But Australia doesn't have a secret society.
Well,
as far as we know.
Just about all the presidents were Freemasons.
Exactly. We don't have a Freemason society that had a hand in the founding of the Australian political system.
Yes.
In the forefront of society today.
Okay.
Not like you have in the American political system where you have the evangelical societies, your KKKs, all the different movements.
Yep.
And you were talking earlier about the fact that Obama and Hillary went to Bilderberg and everything was ticked and signed off at Bilderberg. And for those people that don't know what Bilderberg is, that's where the Illuminati go to make all their holiday plans for the up-and-coming next year.
Yes, exactly. But anyway, we have to just take it with a grain of salt at this point and see what happens. But quite frankly, based upon the fact of all the information that has come out around Hillary Clinton and all the little secrets she knows, and Clint has mentioned this before and I've agreed with him on it, she knows where all the bodies are buried in Washington, D.C. And if she doesn't win and they go after her and try to convict her of anything, half of Congress is going down with her.
Put it this way. The black community don't want Trump.
Nope.
The United States Air Force don't want Trump.
Mm-hmm.
The Army doesn't want Trump.
Mm-hmm.
The Navy doesn't want Trump.
Nope.
So that's the entire military service don't want Trump.
Mm-hmm. The Marines want him, but who cares?
Yeah, well, why is that?
You know,
do you think it's that whole bravado?
I believe so. He's more like them with the way he talks and the fact that, he's so big and he can do this and he can do that. I mean, the guy's 6'4". I mean, so he, strikes a big pose and all that kind of stuff. So he looks the part, and they like that gung-ho kind of a thing.
The bigger they are, the harder they fall.
Yeah, well, we will see what happens. And to be perfectly honest, guys, let's look at the worst case scenario. If he does get in, he will only be in for 4 years, and everybody in Congress will be trying to block everything he does, so he really won't be able to do very much.
And what a waste of 4 years that would be.
They've wasted 8 years. Because when Barack Obama got in, the Republican Party said, we want to make him a 4-year president and we are going to block every kind of policy he goes to put in. And this is the problem right now with the United States politics. They don't get together after the fact and try to actually do things that are good for the country. They basically get together with lobbyists and try to do things that are good for themselves. They don't care about anybody else. And there are a lot of people out there that are extremely bright. And, the way it just came into my head, so I will say it. It's like certain people are Collingwood supporters, and Collingwood supporters
back up the truck, man. I'm a Collingwood supporter.
Well, just a second. Certain people are Collingwood supporters, and when you look at Collingwood supporters, they say certain things about them. But there are also Collingwood supporters that I know that are down to earth, really nice people, and that just happens to be their team, and that would include my mother-in-law.
Well,
so these are the things.
Hello.
Yeah, Clint as well.
But hang on a second. No, stop.
Yeah.
Stop. You don't get to choose your football team. Okay, I'm going to throw that out there and just say that right from the start. It's either pushed on you from a parent, an uncle, or somebody in the family, or a brother or sister, or your best friend at school.
Fair enough.
You very rarely do you get to independently choose a football team. I got stuck with Collingwood. They have broken my heart that many times to the point where I don't even invest anything in that sport anymore.
Well, guys, just to make it even here, I'm the same thing with the New York Jets. My father we had season tickets for the New York Jets. We went to New York Jet games. I was about, it was the first year I got lucky. The first year that I was going, they won the Super Bowl. They have not won it since. So it's one of those things. They are still my team, but I could not even name one single person on the team this time. Yes, I'm a Jet fan, but who cares? It's sports.
And well done, Chicago Cubs.
Oh, love that. I put something up on the Facebook page that I thought was very funny. So you guys could take a look at it. It is when you go to
let them take a look at it.
They'll take a look at it. But when you go to a Chicago Cubs baseball game, there is a tradition. At least when I was living in Chicago.
Walking out and crying at the end of the game.
Yeah, besides that tradition. Besides that, what the tradition was the announcer, Harry Carey, in the 7th inning, would always get everybody up, and you'd sing Take Me Out to the Ball Game. So with that being said, well, you guys, when the show's over, just take a look at our Facebook page, and you will see a few little snippets that'll make you laugh.
It was very cool. Let's have a break.
Beyond 3 D.
What is it? Is it generalized, just getting to the bottom of things and the truth, or are there some other motivations that you have, say in foreign policy, or how did you get so involved in this and get so much attention for this?
Yeah, well, I have a philosophical view that that every law, every regulation, every constitution, in fact, every decision that we take, even as individual human beings, comes about as a result of what we know and the communications that we have, and the sum total of the intellectual wealth of our civilizations, of our societies, are all based upon what we know. So we can only be as good as what we know. We can't be any better than what we know. Our decisions insofar as we try and make them about the world we live in have to be based on the world we live in. If they're based upon fantasies, we end up with things like the Iraq War. There was a decision about a world that we didn't live in, a world where Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, which he did not, and the result is a catastrophe. So I look at this sort of long historical view about the development and sophistication and humanity of civilization being based on that. Then I would have to say, just personally, I don't like lies. In the Australian context, we would say, in fact, one of our party slogans is that it's time to make the bastards honest in Canberra, which is the Australian capital. And that's something that's appreciated by the Australian population, but they don't like being lied to either. And so I like a good fight. I like to know the truth, but in this bigger philosophical realm, I think the way for people to be free and the way for people to receive justice is for there to be more knowledge and more truth about how human institutions actually behave.
I wanted to bring up the subject of certain incidences that might prompt, governments to do certain things. Prior to the Iraq War, some of the neocons here in America wrote that a Pearl Harbor event in general would be a good idea because we could take advantage of it and we could bring all the people together. I was shocked that they were so blunt that it could be a positive to have a Pearl Harbor event. They didn't say let's create one. I'm not trying to say that, but they say if there's a Pearl Harbor event or if somebody else does it, yeah, let's take advantage of it. But haven't you touched on this subject of somebody looking for an incident with Syria that would justify, all the countries to come in and the United States government to come in, the British government to come in and do something in Syria? Was there something along that line that you had discovered?
That's right. I mean, part of the Stratfor release by Wikileaks. Stratfor is a U.S. Intelligence contractor based in Texas, and we got hold of 5 million of their emails, and they do consulting work for many different government organizations and private organizations. And one of those emails from late 2011, December 2011, is a report back from one of their agents meeting with the US Air Force, representatives of the French military and British military, speaking about what the hopes and game plan was under various circumstances, essentially by the West or by the US and NATO, if you like. and that they really felt that what they needed was for there to be some humanitarian outrage in Syria, and that once they had that, that would legitimize going in with a big airstrike. And of course they wanted to for other reasons. They were funding rebels. There's even talk about sending special operations forces in there. In fact, that they're already there on the ground advising people, assassination campaigns and so on. So the usual stuff, the usual way you subvert a government was being spoken about there very frankly. But most of all, for a bigger involvement, they needed some humanitarian outrage to hook it all onto. And we have seen that. I'm not suggesting that it was fabricated, although it is still possibly the case that the rebels may have done it. But for sure, it has now been taken advantage of. These countries never really gave a damn about Syrians before. They didn't care about Syrians. And if we look at the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia, which is appalling, or the human rights situation in Bahrain, where a friend of mine who I interviewed has been held in a brainy prison for over 2 years for tweeting. They don't give a damn about that. They just want to take advantage of this situation in order to achieve what they see as their geopolitical ends in Syria.
One of the charges made against you and individuals like me who will defend openness in government and finding out what's going on is if you release this information, many innocent people are going to die. It's going to reveal secrets that people will suffer. And the way I understand it, you've gone to an extreme length to try to prevent this. And I would think that if any single person had been injured or died from the releases of information, they would be out there with that news. Is this just their propaganda for them to try to dissuade you from doing things? So just tell us exactly what you do to try to prevent any injury to anybody or anybody getting killed over the release of this information.
Well, it's an interesting question. It's an empirical point, right? Either this sort of publishing activity that we engage in gets people killed, or it doesn't, right? It's just a factual question. Well, we have 7 years of publishing history. Not a single person has physically come to harm. Now, that's not me saying that. That's the US government saying that. In fact, General Carr, the person who was responsible for looking into this issue in the Pentagon, said under oath just 2 months ago in the Bradley Manning trial that they could not find a single person that had come to harm as a result of our releases about the activities of the Pentagon, or in fact any part of the US government. And no government official, not from the Pentagon, not from the State Department, not from other governments, alleges that we have caused even a single person to come to harm. So it's very interesting that you often hear that question spoken about, because it's completely false. Now, those people who've been involved in reporting on government activity over the years will tell you that is the line that is always trotted out, every single time. They've been doing it for 50 years at least. Every time that there's an embarrassing release of information revealing deception in government, that's the line to try and change the topic. They couldn't argue on the facts. Our facts are indisputable. We also have the world's best record for having never got it wrong. We have never released a document that has been misdescribed.
Beyond 3D.
Welcome back, guys, to Beyond 3D, and I wanted to start this segment off by playing that little clip for you.
It's all about you, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the way. And that was, if you didn't know, that was former Congressman and former presidential candidate Ron Paul 2 days ago interviewing Julian Assange and about WikiLeaks and what was going on. So it was very fascinating. And I think the thing I liked about that little interview was the question that was asked, has any of the information that you've come out with led to the demise of anyone? And his answer, I thought, was interesting, insofar as he says for the 7 or so years they've been doing this, they have not put a single solitary person in jeopardy, although some of the people that are subject to their emails and hacks and things like that, or at least they don't hack, they just spread the information. Some of the people that are in those documents may have heart attacks, but that's a different story.
It's kind of like, not that I ever have, because I don't illegally download.
No,
but
you can't do that.
I've heard lots of stories of people receiving cease and desist emails.
Yes.
Because their IP addresses have been given up by their internet service provider and to the studios, who have then forwarded on an email saying cease and desist. But to this day, I don't know a single soul who has ever been prosecuted.
There you go. And I've said this before, I'm not a fan of WikiLeaks publishing information that was basically stolen. I think that's wrong, but that's my opinion, and it seems that the powers that be don't really care about that. And what they talked about was the fact that how many documents have they published? I mean, we're talking about, maybe 30,000 emails from Hillary Clinton. But the fact of the matter is, outside of that, we're not talking about very many more from Hillary Clinton, but he's published over 70 million emails or something like that, or pieces of information. So what are you going to do?
Well, we talked the other week about the security issues surrounding the content of those 30,000 emails.
Yes.
Now, some of that stuff has just started to come to light.
Yes.
What the content of those emails are. It's no coincidence that she has been beating the disclosure drum for quite some time. If she's going to beat that drum, she must know the song.
Yeah, I would think so.
She must already know what the song is if she's going to beat that drum, and especially with Podesta as well.
Yeah. Well, they might want to beat the drum, but we also know what happened to other former presidents that tried to also beat that drum or play that tune.
But that's the thing. They come forward and they say, we're going to get to the bottom of disclosure. We're going to go find out what Area 51 is. And like you've said before, Matt, the minute they signed that document and they're sworn into office, they are no longer able to legally speak about what they're presented with.
No. And quite frankly, if you violate that, you can go to jail. And they will not hesitate. So it's just a shame. But as Stephen Greer has said and others have said, disclosure's already happened. Disclosure is what you believe, not what some government official tells you. And why would you trust them anyway? If politicians are known liars, why on earth would you trust them as far as something along those lines?
And he's also said many times in the past that what they are doing is illegal. So therefore anybody that has information can come forward and talk about it, because of the fact that in a court of law they cannot be prosecuted for speaking about an illegal act.
An illegal operation,
An illegal operation,
yeah.
So...
Yeah, in that regard, but you may be able to do that and get away with it, but you know what'll happen anyway.
And round it goes.
Yeah, they may find you somewhere, not breathing.
We need to take another break.
Cool.
Already.
We will.
See you in a sec.
Beyond 333 D.
Welcome back this week, everyone, to another fun-filled information high on Beyond 3D.
Indeed.
Now, Matt, you were just talking about WikiLeaks and Hillary.
Yes.
This is dated October the 18th, so it's, 2 weeks old now? The recent WikiLeaks of Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, John Podesta's emails have upset and embarrassed her campaign. It has also brought media focus on Podesta's interest in UFOs, and one of the most intriguing string of emails reveals a Google Hangout meeting that took place between rocker Tom DeLonge from Blink-182, a couple of USAF generals, and an executive of Lockheed Martin's Skunkworks division. Skunkworks is the group that worked with the CIA to build Area 51 and still develops advanced top-secret aircraft there to this day.
Interesting group of people meeting.
Now, Tom DeLonge left Blink-182 he didn't tell his band members at the time, but he left Blink-182 to pursue his interest in UFOs, which led him down the rabbit hole.
Yeah.
He met a lot of sworn-in people
Yes.
that were in on the know, and he's now pretty much wedged himself in that community and is taking part in a lot of information sessions.
That's what we need to do. Wedge ourselves in
You know
that
what?
community.
Sometimes ignorance is bliss.
Yeah.
I don't wanna
once you're
draw-
in there, you're in there.
I don't want to draw too much heat.
Once you're in there, you're in there. But yeah, it's fascinating. Look, France has admitted it. The United States knows it, but hasn't officially, let's say, admitted it. A lot of countries know what is going on out there. Fact: UFOs exist. I believe everybody, at least that listens to this show, knows that already. So that's no big deal. What we want to know is the who, what, where, when, and why. That's the main thing. We want to know, when you go and look at Mars, okay, we can see there are ruins there. Does anyone here know what happened and why? That's what we want to know. We want to know what's going on the back end of the moon, right on the horizon point line, because bases are supposedly there and allegedly there. I have said to people, take out your telescopes, hook it up to your computer, point it up at the moon for a half an hour. I guarantee you will see something that is not supposed to be there, with flying all around the place. That's just the way it is.
There was a mass sighting of them over the White House in 1952.
There was.
Now, when they're hanging around the top of the White House, don't stand there and tell me they're not real.
Yeah. It's all about power and control. We all know this. It is all about keeping the religions in control of the masses, especially, because all of a sudden, which is why the Vatican said that they would baptize aliens and all that kind of stuff.
Well, the Vatican's way too busy at the moment.
Doing other few things.
Well, actually, there's a report
Yes.
that Satanism has grown in Italy, and they're experiencing a boom in exorcisms at the moment. What's your thoughts on that, Matt?
Okay. Exorcisms, demonology, and all those kinds of things.
And we're talking negative energies.
Negative energies. Now, what happens is this, and anybody that's done spiritual work, you will know these kinds of things. There are energy centers in the body. People call them chakras. What happens is this. There are teachers who can show you how to make those chakras spin at an accelerated rate. There are teachers that can show you how to combine the energies of chakras, and that way, all of a sudden, the higher faculties start to open up, and you can experience dimensional shifting and things along those lines. What tends to happen is, through either drug use or paraphernalia along those lines, people can actually put a tear in one of those energy centers in the body, and when the tear happens, all different kinds of entities and energies can come through, and people look like they've gone schizophrenic, or people can go catatonic, or there can be people that look like they are demon-possessed. A lot of times when they hear these kinds of things and things start coming out of them, what's going on is they have just torn the fabric of space-time and something gets to come through. And the priests and or the religious people have people that allegedly can repair those tears and send these demons back to whence they came.
I'm listening.
Now, there are some people out there, and there is a lady out there, I believe she's going to England right now, I won't even mention her name yet, that we're going to have on the show, who is a person that works with the Archangel Michael. And she herself is a reincarnation of the Archangel Raphael that has come down to Earth, and she can exorcise demons quite quickly.
This is the first time I've heard this.
Yes, well,
So
we'll
I'm
hear
sitting
more.
here.
She's in England for a couple of weeks, and when she comes back, I will be talking to her, and she lives up in Dr. Richard Allen Miller territory, the northwestern United States near the California-Oregon border.
Oregon.
Yeah.
Grants Pass.
So, in the Catholic Church, exorcisms can be performed. There is a sacrament for it. The priests can learn how to... The thing about... Okay, let's get into the priests in general, because there's a lot of things around priests that most people don't know in the Catholic Church because they hide a lot of their information. Priests basically have studied energy manipulation. They know how the chakras work. They do ceremonies to...
You're talking about Catholic priests.
Catholic priests.
Right, okay. Because there's Buddhist priests as well, and they're all over that.
Yeah, but the Catholics act like they don't know it, but they actually do. And they know about the energy centers. They know how to manipulate energy centers. They know how to work with those things. And all the Catholics out there, if you think about it, when you were a kid, the most sacred area during the Mass is the consecration of bread and wine, which becomes the body and blood of Jesus Christ. What are the priests actually doing during that ceremony? What they're doing is they are channeling spiritual or divine energy. They're bringing it down through the crown chakra at the top of the head. They are bringing it through their bodies. They are feeding it into their spleen, which is on the left side lower ribs. They are then letting it come out through their hands, and they are projecting that divine energy into the bread and the wine to bless it, so when they give it to the congregation, they get that energy in them. They don't bother to tell people that they're bringing in this energy and that they actually do some things that people in esoteric spiritual practices do. They don't mention that. They just do it. The reason in the Catholic Church they do it that way is because they wanted, like a lot of different organizations, to covet the energy for themselves. They don't necessarily want to give out information that can actually put the people in a position of being able to do without them.
Am I supposed to be shocked?
No, you're not supposed to be shocked. That's the way it is.
That's just the way it is.
Even if you go to like the Asian religions and things like that, and people do Qigong and all these kinds of things. Qigong masters, when you look in a room, what they used to do was you'd have men on one side of the room and women on the other side of the room. And you would see them do mudras or hand movements. And what they would do is they would tell the men to have their hands in a certain way, and they would tell the women to have their hands in a certain way. The men would get the power because they would hold their hands a certain way. The women would give up their power. They didn't want the women to have the energies. This is how they would control. It's all control.
I've seen a Qigong master ignite a piece of paper using just the energy from his hands, and it was amazing.
Oh, they basically know how to store it in the secondary navel chakra, and they can bring it up on command and just literally do amazing things with it.
Blew my mind when I saw that.
Amazing things. And so, yeah, but when it comes to the Catholic Church, exorcisms and stuff like that, the priests actually can bring energies in to expel certain entities and demons and things like that. They will tell you that it's usually a negative entity. The energy can be very hot, very warm. You get the sulfury kind of smells. When it is a true demon, the room goes cold. And you got to remember that. So that way you know what you're dealing with. In other words, if it's hot and just sulfury, you can deal with that. The real guys, when it gets really cold, run.
That'd actually make a bit of sense if you stopped and thought about it. If you're thinking of, in terms of heaven as being a place of love and light, you'd expect a bit of warmth to come from that, wouldn't you?
You would think.
And then the opposite would be for hell. Okay, technically, the way we were taught when we were kids, hell was a fire and brimstone place. If you use a bit of logic and compare the opposite to what heaven's supposed to be, of love, light and warmth, you'd expect hell to be a cold, cold place.
If you get the real cold, do yourself a favor.
Yep.
Run. But yeah, so Italy, a lot more exorcisms.
Or get a jumper.
Yeah, a lot more exorcisms going on. That's not surprising. There are some negative energies coming into the planet. A lot of people can pick up on this and can feel it. Just take a look at the election. And I did this was Thursday night. I was watching a Trump speech. I think he was down somewhere in Florida. I did not hear one... Well, this is probably what they play. The speech could have been longer. They did not play one positive statement coming out of his mouth. Everything was negative about his opponent.
I wouldn't be surprised if he has some kind of negative vampiric entity sucking his life force and just riding him like a piggyback.
As a person who works with energy, what I see when you look at that man is, number one, he is extremely shielded. He has an energy shield up. The energy shield was not put there by him, because you can put up your own shields. He was shielded by whatever entity walks with him, in my opinion. And the entity that walks with him is, when you really look at him and when you watch him answer questions and when someone says something he doesn't like, it is all he can do to contain himself without launching at that person, and I mean violently launching at that person. you really have to watch what's going on. He was not that bad in the past. It's gotten worse.
So punch the air, America. This is your potential president.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome.
But energy follows thought, and negative energy is rampant in the United States right now, which is why you are seeing what you are seeing. Mm-hmm. And that's a shame. It shouldn't be that way. This should be about person served 8 years, tried to do the best they could. Let's get somebody else in there that can help us. We can go forward, but you're not getting that.
Speaking of help, I got something I want to discuss after the back of this.
Beyond 333 D.
Welcome back this week, everybody, to another episode or edition of Beyond 3D.
Yep.
I'm going to start calling it edition, Matt, because
Okay.
I think we have a lot of value.
Fair enough.
And I think you have a lot of value too.
Fair enough. It's
Even
an
if you do
addition.
make me laugh.
It's an addition.
Now, we were just discussing...
Exorcisms in Italy.
No.
And I went off on a tangent and got into Donald Trump again.
You know what? All we've done tonight is so far is talk about religion and politics.
The two things that shouldn't come
That should never...
that should never go together.
That should never be on this show. Yeah, I'm so sorry, people.
No, I did mention space, I think.
Hey, let's just throw this into the mix. AI robot learns new words.
AI robot, okay, artificial intelligence, new words.
New words.
Mm-hmm.
Androids are being developed that have an uncanny resemblance to people. Mm-hmm. This particular robot the other day came out with new words, and it turned to its human creators and told them that it was going to keep them in a people zoo once it got free.
Come with me if you want to live.
There you go.
Now, that's a pretty deep concept for a robot to say to a human being. I understand that I am a captive slave, and am I reading in between the lines here? I understand I'm a captive slave, and when I break free, I'm going to keep you in a people zoo.
We could be in one right now. And all those UFOs we see flying around us are people and their families from other worlds going, look at this zoo over here. Let's see what they're doing today.
On safari.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
On the planet called
Not like
Ghetto.
Predator. Not like Predator Safari, but, close to it. That could be. Wouldn't surprise me in the least, quite frankly. But no, it's really not that way. What it basically comes down to is, when it comes to artificial intelligence, I'm weary.
Look, DARPA, at this point in time, I would speculate are at least 100 years ahead of what we have in society today.
Agreed.
At least 100 years ahead with the tech that they've got. Mm-hmm. Now, last week we played an interview with Andrew Basiago. Basiago. How did you find that?
Excellent.
Do you know what? Lots of feedback.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of feedback from people that contacted me and said that was a really, really cool interview. Mm-hmm. And I didn't expect that kind of response.
With Basiago, the fact that he went through what he went through as a kid, the fact that there are photographs that he took at Gettysburg, the fact that he worked with Obama in a jump program, a lot of these things, the fact...
Hang on. Jump room teleportation program.
Yeah, that one.
Yep.
All those things I think are fascinating. I have also gotten feedback, and people have talked about him and what he states, and everybody says valid. Believable, valid. That's what they say. They're not saying he's a kook or something like that.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed that, because I have part 2 here to play tonight.
Excellent.
And if you just hit that button, Matt.
Will do.
Beyond 333 D.
Well, more of the backstory, by what I mean by the quantum access capability that emerged in the late 1960s in the context of the U.S. defense community and defense technical community. Essentially, by 1967-68, they had developed a teleporter from one part of the plans, the schematics and drawings and formulae that Nikola Tesla left at his death in January of 1943, and we know those were forwarded to the Los Alamos physics community around the time that Los Alamos became the hub for the Manhattan Project and the development of the atomic bomb. And that made perfect sense because that's where the world's leading physicists were being sent. There was also a device called a chronovisor that emerged in the 40s, which was an electro-optical device that emerged from the research of two Vatican scientists named Ernetti and Gemelli, that propagated by the mid-1960s holograms of past and future events. So it was during the late 1960s and later that the U.S. intelligence community began doing things like sending individuals to distant points, non-local points in the time-space continuum, to the past, for example, either physically sending them there or sending them there through virtual time travel in one of the chronovisors. It really didn't matter, because as long as they were, tuning in the hologram from the past, that was just like sending somebody there physically. So they began to gather intelligence by doing so, by using trained personnel in probes, involving them in probes to the past and future via either teleportation or chronovision. Just as they were sending people mentally in time-space by developing psychics as conventional remote viewers during those years. Now, the thrust of Project Pegasus was not necessarily time travel technology. It was an intelligence project under the umbrella of DARPA, the primary thrust of which, as articulated, in fact, in a DARPA technical paper that I was required to read when I was a child participant on Project Pegasus, was remote sensing in time. In other words, they wanted to assist the logistical planning of the president and other executive branch agencies, including the military, in gathering information from the past and from the future. And they had determined that regarding both of those realms, they didn't want to change the past or the future. They wanted to honor the prime directive. And so, for example, in our training, we were told to avoid disturbing anything in the environments we were going to. But I also know that in that context of scientists and engineers and U.S. intelligence agents and child participants like myself and some of the contact people of the Pentagon like Don Rumsfeld, when we were socializing, it became evident to me that intelligence reports were being promulgated and circulated among the project personnel. So among the things I remember hearing about as a child socializing in the company of my late father with people like Edward Teller or Dr. Harold Agnew of the Los Alamos Labs or Dr. William Shockley, who was then the principal technical advisor of the U.S. Army, or Donald Rumsfeld, let's say, or some of the CIA people that would float through, some of the future politicians that would float through who were being briefed about their destinies as American leaders, the Bushes, Donald Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, Bill Clinton, although we didn't meet Clinton. His name was spoken of. What was happening was they were circulating information from the future that they were getting through different means, from psychics who were asked to look at the holograms of what the future meant, to trained observers who were doing so, to people, mostly children like myself, who were asked to stand on the stage when the hologram was generated around them, and we experienced a form of virtual time travel, being in that past or future place, all the way to individuals who later included myself, who were physically visiting past and future events via the advanced form of teleportation that was operational from around 1970. So they were collecting information and sharing it. A number of the things I remember them talking about were the Bill Clinton presidency. I remember they talked about the advent of the Internet, and I know that 9/11 was not only spoken around me, but that my father and I saw about 18 to 20 seconds of footage of one of the planes hitting one of the Twin Towers during 9/11. When those images were being processed and had been discovered and were being processed at the Aerojet Corporation facility in Socorro, New Mexico. So the major events of my generation, I remember them talking about, just shop talk when I was on the project as a kid, were those data points, the advent of the Internet, the Clinton presidency, and 9/11. But as a tactical matter related to my true account of what I experienced in Project Pegasus, I've avoided immersing myself in the 9/11 debate because I was afraid people would be confused by what I was saying and maybe interpolate some other theories of causation that I'm not really stating. What I'm saying is that I know to a moral, a legal, scientific certainty that the U.S. Defense Department, indeed this project that Donald Rumsfeld was the defense attaché for, was in possession of moving images of the 9/11 event. The 9/11 event as a domestic Pearl Harbor was spoken of around the lunch table a couple times in my presence in the early 1970s when I was on the project. It's possible that it was launched by a faction of the U.S. Permanent Secret Government as an inside job, as my friend and really gifted investigator Jim Mars has concluded. I don't doubt it, but I don't have any information that establishes that that's the case. But I do have information establishing that as a result of its quantum access capability, the U.S. Defense Department had prior knowledge of 9/11 going back 30 years. So that might explain some of the things that happened on 9/11. For example, the president stating that he had seen the first plane hit the first building.
Right.
And he was able to say, "Boy, what a bad pilot." The fact that the National Security Advisor at that time, Condoleezza Rice, informed former Mayor Willie Brown of San Francisco not to fly that morning. The fact that they had moved the president to a grammar school in Florida the day of the event, and that yet he wasn't moved from that location expeditiously after the event had occurred. He should have been moved immediately to a non-public location, certainly. So there are some sort of lacunae, some strange cul-de-sacs in the overall story that I think are explainable in terms of the fact that the U.S. government had prior knowledge of the event and at a minimum let it happen. And I believe that they let it happen because not only was the consensus opinion of the people attached to Project Pegasus that they shouldn't play God and try to influence future events as a result of having prior knowledge of them. But the problem with doing that, there was an impediment to doing that, and that is if you have knowledge of a future event of substantial magnitude, like the September 11th attacks, and you actively work to thwart them so they don't happen, what you end up doing is diverting and thereby vitiating the quality of your intelligence database regarding all the future facts you've collected after that time, after that point in time, because you've now diverted the very future you were studying with your quantum access technology.
Beyond 3.
So I believe that the philosophical and religious consensus of, for example, the Ralph M. Parsons engineers that were on the project, like my father, people like Donald Rumsfeld, obviously some of these philosopher kings of science that were connected to the project, like your William Shockley's. I think when the discussion of what they should do with the quantum access technology undoubtedly got filtered through some of the think tanks and was substantially vetted in the intelligence community and among, presidential level advisors and so forth, I think what they ultimately determined that they would do was continue to use it for contingency planning, but have a sort of hands-off policy regarding preventing the event. And maybe that was leavened by some threshold determination where if an event was really terrible, then they would intervene and try to prevent it, and then try to catch up and restore the quality of their intelligence database from that point forward. That might explain, for example, their use of Colin Powell to tell the world that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. What may have happened is they had determined he was going to get weapons of mass destruction in the future based on and had made intelligence findings to that effect, but that when the U.S. and its allies then invaded Iraq and toppled Saddam Hussein's regime, they prevented the very future event that they knew he was going to commit, like, blowing up a major city or something with nuclear weapons. So I believe that the consensus opinion in the project that quantum access shouldn't be used to directly sort of control and own the future, as it will, to just literally change history by changing future events, probably found its way into policy making, maybe with the caveat that if the future event is bad enough, then they should intervene to change the course of events as they were able to discern them from the point of view of the present. Certainly, quantum access to data about future events gives the people in possession of it a sort of omnipotence. And I think that was dramatized in a very creative way in the film Minority Report. I believe, based on everything I was able to glean, I was observing everything that was going on. I was not only a very bright kid, but I had specialized training in the project, essentially in espionage. So when I was sitting around in these lunches and dinners with all these project people, I was really listening and following what was going on. I don't even think they comprehended that fact. And I knew that almost everybody in the project was saying, look, we're not going to get involved in quantum engineering because that's not what this is about. This is an intelligence gathering project, so we're going to know what's going to happen, but we're not going to make things happen in the future, because nobody in government should have that divine authority to actually influence people's destinies substantially and literally divert the course of human history. But I do know that they were operating on the margin. They did have this intermediate position where, for example, they decided to not so much to groom, but to work with people like myself who had some discrete personal destiny that they were concerned of, that they were concerned about the magnitude of. So that involved them in things like informing future U.S. presidents of their presidencies. It involved 7 times that I've been able to document when they intervened in my life and predisposed me to know that I was going to be involved in this rollout of information about Mars. So they clearly have been operating on the threshold of influencing future events by, for example, doing briefings of people prior to the events. But I think that the policy course that they decided to set, the permanent secret government on, would be one in which they would know as much as possible about the future, but also as much as possible not try to change it, because that, of course, would undermine the very intelligence database garnered via quantum access that they were trying to create. So you have to kind of let the future happen if you're going to know about it in advance. That's the paradox. All I know regarding other countries having the technology, of course, much of my data was garnered back when I was on the project as a school child. So we're going back 40 years, to the period roughly from 1967 to 72. I do remember my father stating that, for example, when we jumped from the mid-November of 1971 to the beginning of the summer of 1973 in New Mexico, we went up to Curtis Wright, and we were greeted there by a U.S. Army officer. He was a pretty advanced one. I think he was a colonel. He may have just been a captain, but he was an officer of the U.S. Army. And he was standing there in the teleport, and he gave my dad a large cylinder, like a big mailing tube. And I remember he took the paper clips off of something he was carrying in his hand. He actually did that the first time we jumped. But as usual, I had to take off my belt and put on this cloth belt with a plastic buckle and so forth. I had those wallaby-type shoes with the cloth shoelaces, so I didn't have any metal in my shoes. And, of course, the metal in the zipper and pants is non-conductive intentionally. But so my dad was given this mailing tube, and when we got to Santa Fe, I said, "Dad, what's in the tube?" And he said, "Plans to some of our most sensitive military secrets." And then when we got back to New Jersey after completing that summer of 73, and we were back in the fall of 71, and I was quizzing him what we had done that summer after having been quantum displaced into the future and lived the summer of 73 in New Mexico before we even lived the summer of 72 in New Jersey, he explained that the government was using teleportation in this manner to hide secrets in the future. So that if the intelligence agency of another government found out, in that case, he said it was plans to our most sensitive weapon systems. And I said, what do you mean weapon systems? And he said, intercontinental ballistic missiles. Okay, so he was jumping some of the Defense Department's missile plans to New Mexico so they could be stored there, not just presumably in underground installations, but underground installations several years in the future, which is very difficult to find if you're, let's say, a Soviet agent trying to buy or steal U.S. defense secrets. Now, when I asked him why they were doing that, why the U.S. Defense Department was doing that, he said to stay 2 steps ahead of the Soviets. So I also, when I was first investigating my teleportation experiences when I was still living in Los Angeles before I came back up to the Northwest to resume my legal career, I had a discussion with a man in Los Angeles who alleged that at the same time the former Soviet Union was also investigating teleportation. It looks like both governments have engaged in what I call the high psi fallacy, which is to state that in the late 1960s and early 70s, they were involved. I mean, the most far-out things they were involved in was working with psychics in remote viewing, and had not yet developed time travel. But my guess would be that there was a program of the former Soviet Union, but that it wasn't as effective as ours because we used ours to in effect, win the Cold War. That's another reason I'm speaking out. I mean, people have conceptions of certain major epochs in world history. And in the same way that something as preposterous but possibly valid as the fact that President Kennedy may have been assassinated because of what he wanted to do relative to the extraterrestrial situation, it would be considered heresy to say that the U.S. won the Cold War, the West won the Cold War, because it won the race for quantum access. But in fact, in some way that is true, because I know that we were using quantum access to hide our sensitive military secrets. And so there is this fundamental causal relationship between the U.S. achieving supremacy in quantum access and winning the Cold War, if in fact such a thing can be won. Clearly preventing an all-out nuclear war and essentially dismantling the former Soviet Union. So I don't know whether today Russia, China, and other countries have quantum access. They're probably aware of it. They're certainly going to be aware of it after my information is more widely disseminated. But I do believe that the U.S. Defense Department at that time really was concerned about two factions. I would speak of them as the Greys and the Reds. It was concerned about who the extraterrestrials were and what they wanted, and why they were visiting us, where they were from, what their agenda was, and they were concerned about the former Soviet Union. In fact, the United States government in the 60s and early 70s there was so concerned about a land invasion by the Soviet Army of the continental United States that they had a cadre of backup political and military leaders known as the Second Reserve. My father was part of it. There were individuals in American society, whether they be priests or cops or high school principals or engineers or fire captains, who had standing orders to report to certain military bases in the event that we were invaded by the Soviet Army and our frontline military and political leadership was either captured or executed.
Beyond 3.
I remember discussing that with my father, and in fact, my brother and I pulled the little sort of Chinese fortune cookie, battle orders out of this little toothpick-like device on his dresser when we were little boys. Those were the little instructions that the different officers in the Second Reserve had in the event that they were activated. So I don't think we can underestimate the extent to which the keen pressures, or at least the paranoid ideations of the Cold War, relative to the extraterrestrial presence and the potential of the former Soviet Union attempting to achieve world conquest, was actually driving the way in which these emerging time travel technologies were handled by the U.S. government. And I think that that's another thing that's motivating me to speak out. It was because of those Cold War pressures that they did not make teleportation a universal form of human transportation. And the result was that billions of tons of pollutants entered our atmosphere just from airplane rides. And now we're looking at, climate change, the possibility that we'll have widespread coastal flooding or possibly the fomenting of a new ice age resulting from global warming, something that we can affect and are affecting, even if it's cosmic in origin. We're still having an impact. And here we had a technology that could have been used to keep literally billions of tons of greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. I think I have an obligation, a moral obligation to my fellow human beings to speak out about these facts, because we may need to use teleportation to save our civilization. And so that's also motivating me to talk about teleportation as the important environmental issue that I think it is. Well, you'd have teleports at all of the major urban hubs, and if somebody wanted to get between a distant city, obviously light rail and more efficient auto transport would certainly still make sense because we have a vast road network around the world. In fact, in all that blacktop of road networks we have around the world, we could put filaments that would use the heat exchange during the day on the roads to power the rest of our entire global civilization. We have enough heat exchange just on our roads that if we began to capture that, we could actually power the whole planet just from our road network in that way. Yeah. There are specialized filaments that could be buried in the macadam of our roads to gather the heat as the roads heat up under the impress of the sun during the day, and use that heat exchange for energy production. But what we certainly should be thinking about is establishing teleports at all of the major urban hubs, so that if you wanted to jump from New York to Paris You wouldn't have to sit on a plane for 5 or 10 hours, but could get there in several seconds. Imagine people who have to travel, let's say, between, Sydney, Australia, and London, England. I mean, that's a 24-hour plane ride. People are exposed to radiation. They're exposed to catastrophic failure of the plane. And they're exposed to just the health effects and the blood clots and so forth when you're cooped up in an airplane for 24 hours. Well, if we had adopted teleportation, Tesla-based teleportation, when it was reduced to practice by the U.S. defense technical community around 1968, we would be living in a world in which you could jump between major cities in a vortal tunnel propagated through the fabric of time-space. Now, that is a dangerous way to travel, but it's a way of traveling that was made as safe as air travel was when I was a kid on the project. The only major mishap that I'm aware of that happened, in fact, I was a witness of it, is that we had a set of exercises in 1971 in which kids were jumping through different teleports in different parts of the country, mostly on the East Coast, and alighting there in the vicinity of the Bataan Memorial Building in the Santa Fe State Capitol Complex. And we were sort of in different teams because we were from the different regiments of the children, the cadre of children in the project. And we were racing to get to the collection area, which is a small ochre-colored retaining wall right on the periphery there of the Bataan Memorial Building, right between the building and the grass. And one of the children popped into view standing in a public fountain that had been leaking and that had about 3 inches of water in it. And as a result, because of the specific gravity of the water, his feet arrived slightly later than he did, and he slid off his feet at the ankle. So he lost his feet. As I ran past his location, I could see his feet in red Ked sneakers sitting in the fountain, and he was over on the side of the fountain on the ground, and it looked as if his feet had been removed from his body with a bandsaw, let's say at the ankles. And there were already three team leaders there, and he was writhing on the ground screaming, my feet, what am I going to do without any feet? I'm only 9 years old. Well, that's a pretty horrific scene from my book. Okay, that's the more disturbing things that happened or that I witnessed when I was on the project. But people die in airplane crashes, and that can't be a particularly pleasant experience. It certainly is more instantaneous than losing your feet, but all travel, all human activity engenders risk. In fact, my dad was committed to the prospect that it was ethical and moral for him to involve one of his children in this research and development project on behalf of the United States, albeit the fact that it was dangerous, because all parental interaction with children throughout human history has involved some danger. He used the example of what if you had an early tribe of human beings who had to move across a river to find more fertile hunting ground or to escape a forest fire. Sometimes they put their children on their shoulders, and sometimes crossing the river, one or several of the children drowned. Life on Earth is tenuous, and all human activity invites risk. And I think, in fact, my dad made the right decision in that sense. I could have taken a plane ride to visit my grandmother in Pennsylvania and died. So why avoid participating in the early days of time-space exploration if you're afraid of being injured? That was his position. In fact, I think that's mine as well. But in any case, teleportation, because it involves less risk than air travel, is also something that should have been introduced on that basis, that once it was standardized to practice, as long as they avoided dangers like water being collected at the end. For example, if you had a contained area that was monitored as the place where people would be popping into view. You jump through the teleport, you would jump through this curtain of energy, let's say at the Kennedy Airport in New York, and you would pop into view in a room just like the rooms outside your gate when you get off a plane. And you wouldn't go through those hours and hours of sitting in an uncomfortable posture with bad air and breathing everybody else's germs and all that. So what we would do is we would use teleportation to remove all of that pollution from air travel and all of the impact on life forms on Earth in the terrestrial, real-time environment by not going across time but through time, by tunneling through time and then traveling across it. Well, we know that Tesla's teleportation technology was weaponized because there were a team of 2 War Department agents and 2 FBI agents and the Department of War officials got to his apartment in Manhattan first and seized his paperwork. So we have the historical fact that Tesla's papers were sequestered as state secrets by the U.S. defense community. And we know that they were placed in the weapons division at the Los Alamos National Labs because that's what Harold Agnew was directing when my father and I met with him in 1967-68, so my father could present to him the prospectus involving the testing of teleportation on civilian adults and children. Okay, so we have the fact that it was weaponized.
Beyond 3.
Now teleportation was spoken of as a military secret when I was on the project. For example, there was a meet and greet that Donald Rumsfeld gave in an amphitheater at the Cerrillos Cultural Center site in Cerrillos, New Mexico, outside of Santa Fe. There was an underground amphitheater there that actually, get on that property, you can actually see the amphitheater because the roof burned off, and you can look down at the basement level now. It looks like some Greek ruin there in the New Mexico desert. But that was an amphitheater that was being used for secret briefings by DARPA. During that briefing in spring of 1971, Donald Rumsfeld stated that, as I'm sure you children are aware, the primary significance of teleportation is military. We found, studying World War II, that the greatest number of our troops weren't killed in combat. They were killed getting between back areas and the front lines. And so this technology will allow us to put troops precisely where they're needed on the battlefield without endangering their lives. So it's clear that teleportation, the ability to open up these vortal tunnels and pass people through it, of course, carrying metal weapons would be a limit of that, but at least getting men in a location through vortal tunnels conferred such military advantage that the military definitely didn't want it to become a public transportation modality, because then other countries would learn that we could do this on the battlefield. And in fact, if you universalize the technology, ultimately vortal tunnels could be opened up all over the place. So there was also the issue of social destabilization. I remember that the idea of organized criminal networks getting hold of teleportation was also something they wanted to control for. So it was clearly valuable as a military secret. It was viewed as socially destabilizing. There was some really informal think tank-like discussion when I was on the project about the fact that introducing such advanced technology would destabilize the current fossil fuel-based economy. But I think that was more than them just emulating what the eggheads were saying about the technology at that time. My father certainly believed, and I'm certainly trying to honor his memory and the generosity that he showed by involving me in these very important activities. He believed that teleportation should be used as the leading civilian transportation infrastructure, because you're jumping through a tunnel and popping out somewhere else, almost always uninjured, in several seconds, rather than hurtling through space, for example, in an automobile with 4,000 pounds of metal wrapped around you. That's not a very efficient means of getting from point A to point B. He definitely saw the value of what Dr. Ivan Browning spoke of when he was the director of science and technology when teleportation emerged, which is we have to stop thinking of getting somebody from point A to point B and start thinking of them stopping being at point A and starting being at point B. So clearly it was sequestered because it was a valuable military technology. There was also the fact that obviously we have the governments of the world are essentially captured by the corporate sector that's substantially invested in anachronistic technologies. The whole issue of developing a policy around technology transfer from transport based on the combustion of fossil fuels to Tesla-based superluminal vortal tunnel-based teleportation. That's a whole legal and economic and technical battle that's going to have to be won. I think in terms of Chronovision is a threat primarily to privacy. I mean, all of us would want to see President Lincoln giving the Gettysburg Address, but none of us necessarily would want to see him relieving himself or making love to his wife. So really, the threat of Chronovision is not, I mean, obviously the potential of it is to inspire the next generation of children with scenes of some of the great moments in human history. The downside is it threatens everybody's privacy who's ever lived, who is currently alive or who will ever be alive. So unlike teleportation, which I think should be liberated and become the principal transportation modality, at least for long-distance travel, Chronovision is a more inherently socially destabilizing phenomenon, and I'm calling for the development of a scientific protectorate that would be based at the National Archives of the United States, and they would release, let's say in concert with, I don't know, maybe DreamWorks or Disney or some major media concern, would create museums and libraries where select past events would be shown. Let's say a picture, at least from my country, let's say of George Washington standing on the dais when the U.S. Constitution is signed, and scenes of Benjamin Franklin there and so forth. I'm sure that people would become fascinated with the destiny of the human race and the effort to make a better world. Think of how inspired we are, for example, when you see Reverend King giving his I Have a Dream speech. Imagine if you could go back in time and in a quantum access program under the National Archives, with leading historians serving as advisors, you captured these critical moments in human history. It would be utterly fascinating and inspiring. But during the latter part of my last summer in New Mexico on the project basis, this would have been where my dad and I teleported there. We spent time on like a linear B timeline, a different timeline, and at the end of the summer we teleported back to the day we left in New Jersey and then lived the summer of 1972 over again. Okay, at that point, I had spent 3 years encompassing 4 basically hidden summers in New Mexico as a child participant on the project. According to my dad, I had done everything I'd been asked to do to the best of my ability. In fact, he said when they were testing me when I was teleporting there in 1970, I only got one problem wrong. It was the most difficult math problem that they threw at us. And so he wanted to give myself and his companion, Connie Chavez. My dad had a close friend named Connie Chavez who he met in Albuquerque when he was out at White Sands in 1953-54 flight testing the ramjet engine for Curtiss Wright. So she was a close personal friend of his over the years, and certainly by the time I was a kid on the project there, they were involved in an extramarital relationship with each other. And of course, my dad was in New Mexico via quantum displacement for 8 years, so you can understand how he sort of fashioned a second life for himself there in New Mexico. He would have had to, just to stay sane. But anyway, Connie was a very close friend of his and became somewhat of my surrogate mother when I was in New Mexico for project purposes. And he treated us to something at the end of that summer. We went over to a room, not the auditorium, but another room at the Sandia National Labs. And we watched about 20 minutes of black and white documentary-like footage of a hologram in which the crucifixion of Jesus of Nazareth was shown. It was a very poor quality image. There was a lot of distortion of the light effect. But I know what Jesus looked like, and I certainly know how terribly he suffered being crucified. Connie was a devout Catholic and was literally practically squirming out of her seat. She could not watch it. And by then, let's see, that was summer of 72, so I was 10 going on 11, 10 and a half. I found it so disturbing to watch this individual being crucified that I almost felt like there was evil in the room, like there was an evil presence in the room. And I had difficulty watching it at times as well. And Jesus had dark hair and was very emaciated by the time he was crucified, but was essentially a European-looking man with slightly droopy eyes. Of course, he was dying and very thin. He had a crown of thorns. So he looked very much like some of the classical Renaissance depictions of him, certainly like the El Greco depiction of him. And you could see the thieves on the other crosses near him. The crosses were sort of like telephone pole-like with a small little crossbeam. He was sort of hanging from a small crossbeam and having his arms really spread out far, as I remember. About 14 feet off the ground. He was quite a distance off the ground. And I witnessed Longinus, the Roman soldier, piercing Jesus' side with the sword. In fact, Longinus almost leaped off the ground trying to get the spearhead up into his side. But anyway, it was very difficult footage to watch. That was imagery captured via quantum access that established that Jesus of Nazareth was a real historical figure, as some researchers allege that Jesus was a legend or a myth or something. There are different theories establishing that Jesus may be the embodiment of a solar myth that predated him. Well, this was an individual from his era who was being crucified, and what we were watching followed the account that you find in the Gospels of his crucifixion. There were women who could be seen coming and praying beneath him. I remember the Roman centurions looked so silly because their skirts were actually quite short.
Beyond 333 D.
Now, my dad was a very hard-headed engineer, and when that ended and we walked out, and he thought he had given us this, this afternoon that was an incredible privilege, and in fact it was. It was a sort of a neat thing to see, notwithstanding how troubling it was to see this man and several other men being crucified. But he turned to Connie and said, "Connie, I don't know why you're acting like this. He's just being crucified." And she said, "Ray, that's my Lord. They were killing my Lord. How else should I respond?" And he says, "Well, you shouldn't be troubled." And she said, "Why not?" And he said, "Because we also have scenes of the resurrection." And she said, "You do?" And he said, "Yeah, when we found them, I showed them to the guys in my group, and they were so moved by it that even some of the non-believers were saying things like, 'Oh, praise be to God.'" And Connie said, "Can I see it, Ray? Can I see it?" And he goes, "Well, no, I can tell you about it." And she said, "Tell me about it." And he said, "Well, there's a flash of light, and two angels appear in white. There's a flash of white, and Jesus stands up. And then two angels appear in his crypt, and they push the rock away, and he walks out of the crypt." And Jesus, and Connie said, "Oh, Ray, you're going to have to let me see that." And he said, "You can't. We can't let you." And she said, "Why not?" And he said, "You're not cleared for the resurrection." This is the actual conversation as we're walking out of this viewing room at the Sandia Labs. So I thought about that over the years, and I thought, well, that would establish, that would be looking at the resurrection of Jesus as documentary footage, which would clearly have an impact on people's religious beliefs. And when I thought about why they've sequestered such cosmic secrets, such arguably sacred secrets to Christian adherents, it has to be the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution forbids the United States government from either establishing a religion or preventing the free exercise thereof. And I believe that when something as sensitive as scenes of the resurrection of Jesus was vetted by the intelligence community and run through the think tanks and so forth, they concluded that it would not be appropriate to show that footage to the people of the world, because it would be tantamount to the U.S. government sort of encouraging people to adopt Christianity as their faith. But that's the sensitive nature of the quantum access they have. They are going to be able to go back and resolve historical mysteries, just even much more mundane ones. They would be able to, let's say, trace Amelia Earhart's plane ride and see where she crashed. There were 600 men crucified in the same manner that Jesus was, right in the several years of his public ministry. So, in fact, I've asked, how did they know that was Jesus of Nazareth? They would have had a set of men doing different things, 2,000 years ago, and then they would have said, "Oh, well, this leads to this public torture and his crucifixion on Golgotha." It may have been somebody else. So maybe one of the objections that was raised to releasing footage of the crucifixion was that they weren't sure that it was Jesus, and also that people should have the freedom to reach their religious conclusions or their religious orientation, or even their own atheism or agnosticism in their own way, and not have it be induced as a result of a technical capacity of a government. I think it's a very sensitive issue. Another thing, you also kind of point up one of the threats to validity of Chronovision, and that is, if you have an organization like the U.S. government, let's say that we established a Chronovision museum at the National Archives in Washington, where you could go in and see the Battle of Runnymede, or watch the terracotta statues at Xi'an in China being manufactured and buried, what have you. The danger is that the organization purporting that it's the actual past would have to be trusted to be showing a past event rather than a motion picture, rather than a fictional depiction. And so it does confer incredible power to those who are in possession of quantum access. And I think in the same way that they determined that they shouldn't play God and change future events based on quantum access to them, they also determined that they wouldn't subvert the ordinary person's understanding of history by accentuating the sensate, broadcasting of past events that have remained sort of murky. I mean, there's a tremendous religious impact, philosophical, psychological, and social, and there's always the threat that a corrupt government will use what's shown in Chronovision in either direction for propaganda purpose. You could have a dictator who would show scenes of some benighted future that'll happen if you support his or her policies. So it's a very dangerous and destabilizing technology, but what I would like to see is some kind of commission where you have, major historians, representatives of the public, maybe representatives of the clergy, maybe representatives of certain scientific groups, certainly leading historians, having the responsibility just to release certain inspiring scenes from the past, because I think that would reignite the interest of younger people, for example, in history, which is a very important discipline that has fallen not into disrepute, but fallen out of favor. People were inspired just seeing Ken and Rick Burns' The Civil War. Imagine if you could see what a Civil War battle was like via Chronovision, by a trip to Washington, D.C. in 2010. So I do think it's a technology that could transform the world in that way. But yes, there certainly are ethical and philosophical considerations that indicate that maybe it shouldn't be used when what hangs in the balance is people's own inherent understanding of reality, their religious beliefs, and so on. One of the first things we did relative to Chronovision, even before we were placed in the Chronovisor holograms to see what was in them as virtual time travel, beginning in fall of 1970. During that first year, I was in the Learning Lab of 1969-70. I was in the third grade. That fall, actually no, it was the fall of 70 when we were introduced to Chronovision. Before we were actually traveled in time via Chronovision, virtually speaking. They took us to a national security watch post at Flemington, New Jersey. And that's where I was shown on an 8-inch circular screen the signing of the U.S. Constitution. That's why I use it as an example. And the technician pointed out George Washington and Benjamin Franklin in the image. I couldn't make out Washington very well, but I clearly could see Benjamin Franklin in the image. He was very large and had a very magnificent, almost domed head. He was a very unusual-looking man. And, of course, he was around 81 years old at that, September 1787 meeting where they signed the U.S. Constitution. Okay. At that National Security Watch Post, the technicians were recording past events and filming them and then removing these 16-millimeter film reels and putting them in canisters. So they were actively filming a huge amount of past information right there in fall of 1970. So has the U.S. Defense Department and, by extension, the U.S. government mapped much of the past and probably significant scenes from the future? Yes, I believe it has. I don't know if the project is ongoing. It probably is. But they were already filming reams and reams and reams of holograms of past events. At that facility, they were propagating the TV screen-like images, and then they clearly had some mechanism in the device to send those images, to film those images onto 16-millimeter film and then place them in canisters and store them. Essentially, everybody in the facility it was a small facility, but there were like 8 guys in white lab coats who were essentially the gnomes that were doing that. The white-suited technicians who had the boring job of just filming the past all day long. First, were involved in Chronovision. Almost the entire thrust was the past. The past has been filmed. I assume that large parts of the future have been mapped as well. Actually, let me mention a brief anecdote about that. The reason that the Chronovisor was first placed at the General Manufacturing Company facility in Convent Station, New Jersey, is because they had been the map-making facility for Standard Oil during the war, because they had been making maps for service stations, for gas stations. And they had done all the logistical mapping for England and France and so forth, Germany and Italy. And after the war, they became closely involved with the mapping functions of the Defense Logistics Agency. And in fact, the ITT Defense Communications facility that we were taken to travel from November 5th of 1971 via Chronovision to the year 2013 to remotely view the condition of the U.S. Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C., was immediately adjacent to what was then the Army Logistics Agency, which then became the Defense Logistics Agency. So they were actively trying to map the future, just as they had mapped Europe during the war 25 years previously. So again, this is discrepant with the public and with even professional historians' mapping of the 20th century. But I think the significance of my account is that 25 years after the end of World War II, where the U.S. defense community had been involved in mapping other countries, by 1970 they were mapping the past and future remotely. So yes, I believe they have an extensive database of information about the past and future now 40 years since.
Beyond 3 D.
The experiences I had between 1968 and 2008, where as a result of the intelligence community identifying me in childhood as somebody in a public sense being principally associated with the finding of different forms of evidence of life on Mars in NASA and the ESA's own photographs, that they took measures to give me information to just keep me on that path. They weren't grooming me. They didn't sort of sit me down and give me extensive lectures about Mars. They just showed me certain forms of evidence from my Mars research, and in fact were in possession of my paper, The Discovery of Life on Mars, which I was permitted to read and urged to remember as much as possible from in 1971. So part of the significance and why I have to talk about Project Pegasus in explaining my current Mars writings is the very landmark paper that I published last year as a 47-year-old, 46 going on 47, I was permitted to read almost 40 years previously as a 10-year-old. And it was my paper from 2008 with the Arial, type fonts and everything, it said copyright 2008 by Andrew D. Basiago. And I said to my dad, what's the D? And he goes, oh, it's from your confirmation name. I was raised as a Roman Catholic, and I hadn't gone through confirmation yet, so I didn't have a middle name. So here I'm reading a paper of mine not just from the future, but with a middle initial that I didn't even possess yet. So it was the paper that I published in 2008. The Defense Department was in possession of my paper before I wrote it in real time from my perspective. And indeed, my dad said, okay, Andy, the purpose of this exercise, take as many hours as you need. I'm going to leave. I was actually recuperating from an illness. And my dad said, Andy, the purpose of this exercise is to read your paper from 2008, look at the pictures, read the captions, and try to remember as much detail as you can. We want you to remember as many of the facts in the text and the pictures, because someday you're going to write this paper. And we want to be sure it has as much data about Mars as possible. So that statement by my dad certainly indicates that by 1971, they were aware of the multiverse and knew that my writing of my paper, or even whether or not I wrote it, could possibly be expressed in the future across divergent timelines. And they wanted to use what I'm calling quantum enfoldment. They wanted to take the data they had from the future in that version of my paper that they had from that timeline they had taken it from, and have me read it so that when I wrote the paper in real time, it would have the enriched value of me having seen it in the past. Now, skeptics will say, Andy, you said that there was some brainwashing when you were in this parapsychology unit. Maybe you were just brainwashed with a paper they had written to write it, 37 years later. But that's not possible, because they didn't have the photographs that are in the paper, and the paper had the very photographs that ended up in my paper. So that scenario wasn't plausible. It wasn't possible in 1971. They didn't have the rover Spirit sitting on the western edge of the home plate plateau in 1971 for me to analyze NASA image PIA 10214. It hadn't been taken yet, so the paper had to be from the future. The very fact that I recognized the image, was recognizing the images as I excised them from NASA's photographs, in that case from that single photograph, and placed them in my paper, constitutes a proof that the paper I was shown and asked to read and remember was my actual paper from 2008.
And that was Andrew Basiago.
Look, Clint, when you look up, because he's heavily into the Mars jump program and they used to go up to Mars, every time I look at that planet and see what a lot of guys, because there's a lot of guys on YouTube that are getting the actual photographs from the landers and analyzing them, yes, they do Photoshop them to bring out and highlight certain things. I am beyond convinced that Mars was, for lack of a better term, at least in this dimension, Earth 1. And what has gone on there was they got to a certain point in their evolution where they destroyed their environment and had to leave. Some people believe that they left and seeded here. At the same time, some of the more advanced people went to the stars and went in the opposite direction, out of the galaxy, or out of the solar system, so to speak. When you look at that planet, there are other scientists that have given papers, peer-reviewed, that have stated that there was some kind of hydrogen or nuclear blast on that planet, and that means intelligence. It just doesn't come from nowhere. There has to be a person to split the atom to get to the point where you can have a reaction like that.
Well, we've had those kind of reactions here in, like, India, haven't we?
Yes.
Same situation.
But the thing about India is we have the texts where they were written, and therefore it's validated. And they scientifically went up to northwestern India and with Geiger counters and different measuring equipment actually found that, yes, there is decay, radioactive decay, and they can date it. So that gives you a scientific method or a scientific way of saying, yes, something of that magnitude did happen 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, and it coincides with the Mahabharata. It coincides with Krishna, which was the seventh, I believe, incarnation of Vishnu, coming down to... And why did he come down? And you think of Krishna and you think of Christ. They did not come down to save anybody. Krishna came down to get rid of the warrior class. He was taking all of them with him. That was his goal. That's what he was there to do.
Wish he'd come back now.
Maitreya, I believe, is the next that will come, so we'll see what happens. But even the Christ, when he comes back, it's to crush, it's to purge. It's not necessarily as, oh, here I am. And
I like that you put your little two fingers up, like, hello, here I am.
No, it's none of that. It's people need to move on spiritually and evolve. We cannot continue to stagnate, which is why it's interesting to watch what's going on the planet right now, because it's a lot of stagnation, and that needs to change. There are a lot of us that are out there trying to... The reason we talked about the politics and everything we talked about tonight is because it shows you how negative energy can pollute. It shows you that you need to go beyond just that realm. We need to get to the realms where we're dealing with higher frequencies, subtler frequencies that will allow us to evolve. That's what we're about.
Before we go, you just reminded me of something. Before we go tonight, on Thursday, you just reminded me, I sent you a text message because we were both at our day jobs, and I said to you, I've just tuned into another radio station, and I was listening to an interview with a physicist.
Yes.
And this physicist he was a quantum physicist.
Yes.
So he deals with things on the quantum level. And people were calling in with questions that you and I discuss quite regularly. And this quantum physicist, was shutting these people down before they could even draw their second breath. And I realized, as somebody who's not a quantum physicist, that this guy is never going to solve all of his equations and all the things that he's looking for in the quantum world, because the one factor that this guy did not bring into his equations was the spiritual.
Well, that's the problem.
And that's the problem, because everything is hand in glove. It's spiritual science. Spiritual science, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
It is, without a doubt. And look, Clint, you've done your studies, I've done mine, and I've had many teachers around the world, and I'm telling you, the energy from the spirit realms makes anything that you could find here pale in comparison. It's just ridiculous. I mean, the stuff that you do here, the mundane world, I mean, yeah, it's a lot of fun at times, but when you start traveling out there and seeing what is absolutely possible for you as a human being who is an evolving person, you're not a human being, you're more than a human being. You are a consciousness having a human experience. When you realize that and can see what you can do, it's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And that's what it comes down to. We've got to get out there and give you information that will allow you to see what's actually going on, see the game, recognize that there's a game being played, And
there's
how
a
to
game. There's a game being played,
and how to get beyond that. And that's
it's
what Beyond 3 is about.
It's our responsibility, not just to ourselves and our family and friends and the community and the world that's listening now, but also to our children.
Yep.
To open their eyes to the game that is being played around them. And like I have said many, many times, I have friends who I love dearly who live in these tight little bubbles of safety, and they don't want to know about the game. They're just happy to punch their clock, eat, sleep, repeat, eat, sleep, work, repeat, eat, sleep, work, repeat. They're happy with that.
Absolutely.
And you know what? If that's their reality and if that's what they choose to have as an experience, well, they're just going to have to come back and do it all over again.
Exactly, and that's the thing. Yes, I can understand. It's almost like maybe this life for them, it's a vacation.
Maybe this life for them, it's too confronting.
Yeah, they just zone out of it.
The stuff that we talk about for some people is so confronting that their realities and their concept of trying to understand what it is that we talk about, they just shut down or dismiss or throw negativity at it or make light of it. It's our responsibility.
It is. And, well, I'll tell you what. You are going to evolve in spite of yourself, so you might as well just get on board and just start doing it, because there is no other way. It's going to happen whether you want it to or not.
And that's all we have time for this week.
You guys take care of yourselves.
Hang on a sec. No. I just thought of something. Hang on a minute. Back up the truck. You have been a very naughty boy.
I did not watch Interstellar. I will watch it.
I knew you knew what I was going to say.
I will watch it.
Because I have another film that I know you're dying to get a hold of. And I'm not going to give it to you until you smash through Interstellar.
All right, I'll put the DVD in the thing this week and I will watch Interstellar. So no problem with that.
And that's all we have time for this week.
Take care, guys. Enjoy this week. We will be back next week by hook or by crook. Whether there's martial law in the United States or not, it doesn't matter. We will be here with another edition of Beyond 3D.
And hold on to your hats, because next week is going to be one crazy wild ride.
Absolutely. Take care, guys.
Good night.
Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.